Hello and welcome back to the FMDG Twitch channel. This is another The Offensive Zone show, and this is your weekly slice of hockey coming at you every Sunday, whenever or wherever you are. Hosted by just myself today, so no Tyler. Unfortunately, he was tied up, but you still get me, and more importantly than me, we have a special guest with us today. So we are going to be covering the Vegas Golden Knights in some detail, but we will be picking up some of the other biggest and best hockey news stories around, and you can get my thoughts relatively animated on the jersey ads as well. So one thing where being a Brit pays off, because when it's jersey ads, I can tell you guys a thing or two about that. But let's get to our guest. He does quite a lot of things, but I'm going to let him explain all of those things. But I'm pleased to say hello to JP.
Hey Ian, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, glad you could be here, mate. Glad you could be here. So we have. Just because I wanted to show there was no unconscious bias when we're talking about the Vegas Golden Knights, I thought, well, why not get a Vegas Golden Knights fan?
Right. I'm not biased one bit. I'm completely objective when it comes to the Golden Knights. No, I wish I could say that, but I try to be. I pride myself in being objective, but yeah, hardcore Vegas Golden Knights fan. So there's going to be some bias in there at times, especially when you're talking about other teams. And
yep.
But but thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. And to be honest, I did a bit of research before this show, so I'm not going to oversell the level of research that I did. I did a bit. And it's only when you actually look at the numbers you realise quite how much fun it must have been being a Vegas fan over the years. But before we get into Vegas, I think it's best that we start with you and just a little bit of an intro from you from yourself, about yourself, and about not only your love of the Vegas Golden Knights, of course, but what Golden Steel is all about as well.
Yeah, so Golden Steel at the moment is basically my Twitter profile, but I plan to expand it into a website and just a brand in general. I really started Golden Steel as a way just to connect with other Golden Knights fans, with other hockey fans, just as a community. Obviously, Twitter is a great place to hang out and talk about sports. And that was initially why I started it. But I happen to create content for a living, and it's really hard for me to do anything just casually, just for fun. And I got onto Twitter and started chatting with people and, realized, wow, this is a lot of fun actually I'm a Golden Knights fan. I'm a Golden Knights season ticket holder, but it's generally an experience just for me and my family. Like, I don't have a huge group of friends that are Golden Knights fans. And so I got on Twitter and I'm like, oh, wow, now I'm hanging out with like hundreds of other fans. Yeah. And we can chit chat and talk about stuff. And since I produce content for a living, I kind of started experimenting and putting out different things and, kind of started being a little bit of a Knights historian, with like game clips and kind of old bits of Knights history. And, sometimes I'll put together artwork or charts or graphics and have just been playing around with some of that stuff. And it's been fun. I feel like, some of the friends that I made on Twitter kind of are enjoying those things. And so, yeah, it's kind of been growing from there. And like I said, I plan to kind of launch a website. And I think going into next season, I'd like to do some sort of, commentary or coverage of the Knights. I'm still formulating exactly what that's going to be. And I might base that more on what, kind of my Twitter buddies, what they enjoy. But yeah, that's kind of the plan. It's still a little bit of a work in progress, but I'm like addicted. I'm on Twitter every day and always chatting with everybody. I, for the most part, answer if anybody comments or chats on my Twitter profile, I pretty much will respond. With the exception, of course, you're going to occasionally run into some people that aren't very civil or, are a bit rude or a bit nasty. And I generally won't engage with those people, but that's really rare. Like the vast majority of people are pretty cool on there. So it's been fun. I'm excited to see things grow and super pumped about next season.
And I think that's probably hockey fan base in general is like that. You get a lot of chirping, but it's all, for the most part, it's relatively lighthearted and well-mannered, so that's important.
Yeah, and that is part of the culture, right? Like chirping is a little bit part of the hockey culture, so you can't get too offended, right? You have to kind of, you sort of have to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah. But
and
anyway,
the same, like you said, there's a lot of what you just said then really resonates with myself because we were kind of talking before we came on live and about like where everything came from, whether it's the Offensive Zone show or Golden Steel, and like you, I tend to be a very all or nothing kind of person, and when you start something, it kind of just grows and grows, and then I start throwing more and more effort and time into it as it kind of builds. So I, from what you're saying about Golden Steel, like it definitely resonates a lot with us and what we started, which is the FMDG bit at the bottom. When we started that, well, it must be coming up to kind of 8, 9, 10 months ago to now obviously doing this show. So great to have a like-minded, never stops thinking and working person on the
absolutely
chat.
And I gotta say, if you don't mind me just paying you a quick compliment, when you invited me to be on, I checked out your stuff and I was like, oh wow, this guy's really like a mover and a shaker. Just looking at your branding, and I can tell that you like hustle, and I was impressed by that. And like, yeah, it's a very slick presentation, and so I was excited to kind of hang out with you and be a part of it. So yeah, thanks again for the invite. And
I'll pay you later for the compliments. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in the post, all right?
Exactly. You can PayPal me.
Yeah. So look, the people that are watching live, and hopefully there is some people watching live, because as we always do with the Offensive Zone show, you can ask questions. We have some set questions, so if you don't, it's not going to be silent for an hour. But and from with myself and JP on, it probably wasn't going to be silent anyway. But if you want to ask your questions, whether they're Vegas Golden Knights related or not, then feel free to use the chat, and they'll pop up on the screen. And obviously we'll ask. JP can't see the screen, but I can, so we're okay on that front. But anybody who is listening wanted to see us talk hockey, so I suppose it's probably the right thing for us to do is to get into the questions. And as a Vegas fan, and anybody that's watched the stuff that we've got on YouTube, and if you haven't, do go check it out. But we entirely went through in detail about the Vegas offseason and the moves that happened. Obviously, Marc-Andre Fleury's the biggest move in terms of I suppose the most notable move, but there was quite a lot of other moves that Vegas made. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were with the moves, and we can go through them one by one if that's easiest for you. And we'll start there.
Yeah. So, obviously, just so that we can all relax, let's get the 600-pound gorilla in the room out of the way.
Yeah.
Right. The Marc-Andre Fleury trade is obviously the most seismic, impactful, move probably that the Knights have ever made as a team in terms of the way the fan base feels about it. I mean, and the hockey world in general, right? But extremely polarizing within the fan base. Twitter has been kind of a scary place for the fans that were especially angry about it. Now, I should qualify all this by saying I love Marc-Andre Fleury, huge fan, super sad to see him go. So everything that I'm going to say after this has to be, you have to keep that in mind. I love Fleury, was super sad to see him go. But my opinion on the Fleury trade, and I think what a lot of Vegas fans are forgetting, and some will probably be mad at me for saying this, because I get a lot of people saying, oh, are you defending management? And I'm not really, I don't have a strong feeling on it either way. But what I see is that management set this into motion like a year and a half ago. Like they kind of committed to, in a way, to moving Fleury a year and a half ago. Like, Fleury had a rough season. It's not unusual when goaltenders get to be his age that they have like a rapid decline. That's kind of typical. And I think what happened is he had a bit of a rough season. Management felt like, okay, Fleury maybe is hitting his, kind of the twilight of his career. He's declining. They brought in Leonard. Then Leonard did great in the bubble. They signed Leonard to a long-term deal. And at that point, the wheels were already in motion, right? They were going to have to move a goalie. And at that time, all the plans were, we're probably going to move Fleury. And I honestly think they probably shopped him for the better part of that year and a half. Now, what blew the lid off this whole thing, what was so crazy, was then Fleury defies expectations. Comes in, has a Vezina winning season, which nobody saw coming. I mean, he's an amazing goalie, right? Hall of Famer, but nobody's like, yeah, he's going to come in and win the Vezina, at 36 years old or whatever.
Yep.
So now they're between a rock and a hard place, right? Like they can't trade him now without looking bad. Like there's no way around it, right? And these are the difficult things about these big moves. Now, I do think, according to insiders and a lot of the press, I do think that when Fleury started playing so well again, I think they shopped both goaltenders. I really do. I think they probably looked for deals on Leonard. I think they probably looked for deals on Fleury. Because they realize, well, we got two amazing goaltenders, but they also realize we can't keep 12.5 million or whatever it is, 12 million in salary in goaltenders. So, that's kind of how I see it. I see it as one of those things where the momentum on this move started a year and a half ago, but it makes management look terrible that he came back and played so well, right? Like, because everybody says, why would you trade a Vezina winning goalie? But I think they unfortunately had committed to trading him well before, at least in terms of the team's finances and the future plan. Like, I don't think they ever planned on keeping both of those guys. I just think the pandemic, and it was maybe helpful, but I think they had a hard time having anybody who would take all that salary. So I told you before that I'm Ian, that I'm long-winded, so you can cut me off anytime, but that's kind of my take on the Fleury thing. And I say all that. I love Fleury. I was really sad to see him go. I also think Leonard is an elite goalie. I think he's great, and I think management believes in him too. So I think the team's going to be fine. But yes, it's heartbreaking to see Fleury go. I mean, he was... Everybody loved him here. I mean, who doesn't, right? Like, they love him in Pittsburgh. They're going to love him in Chicago. But so the fan base is heartbroken over it. But now that the dust is settled, that's kind of my take on how it went down. I think it was an ugly, complicated situation. And man, there's no way management was going to get out of it without upsetting a lot of people, No.
And because he was such a fan favorite, like, they're in a lose-lose situation. The only way it would have been easier, I won't say easy, but even easier, is if he was playing poorly, because the fans would have understood better, I think, than they probably did. Because, like you said, no one expected him to be doing what he, to have the sort of season that he did have. But
which was awesome to see too.
Yeah,
that was great. I mean, like, we were thrilled about it.
Exactly. And Leonard, to be honest, I mean, I'm a big Leonard fan, obviously, because we were talking about it pre-show. But before defecting to the Kraken, I have been a Chicago Blackhawks fan for a long period of time, and I probably still am. I'm just going to have a Kraken jersey on over the top of a Chicago Blackhawks jersey, because I don't think you can ever fully kind of break away from a team. But so I've obviously seen Leonard at his best, and when Chicago traded him, you could maybe argue that it was discussed then. No one's ever going to admit whether it was or wasn't, but it would be interesting to know whether it was ever discussed at that point in time, because it did seem like the Leonard move was far better for Vegas than Chicago at that point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's clever. I actually haven't thought about that, but you could be right. Like, they could have been talking about swapping goaltenders, kind of.
And maybe that when people are looking, saying, well, you didn't get much back for him, maybe it's because they already got Leonard at a cheap rate. So technically they did. And also the other things that didn't help the Golden Knights out, and I know we're going to cover this in a bit in terms of the whole win now mode, but Vegas have been bold ever since they joined the league. And maybe it's part of, just being Vegas and everything that Vegas is about. It's no surprise that a team, from Vegas gambles quite a bit when it comes to going all out on players, which has been fantastic, by the way, for the league. And it's been great to see them kind of go for broke and not be tentative around trade, whether it's Pietrangelo, whether it was even going back to the early days like Shea Theodore. They've always been bold in terms of their trades. But the pandemic then stopped the one thing that everybody thought was going to keep rolling on, which was the salary cap. We saw a big a reasonable increase the year after Vegas came in, and then obviously because of the pandemic, it's been now stuck at that 81.5 million, which it hurt so many other teams as well. But then when you're trying to shop a 7.5 million cap goalie, I know it's only for one season, but still, you've still got to have it. It does limit the teams, and by default it's going to limit you. It's like a house, it's only worth what someone's willing to pay for it, and if nobody was willing to take Fleury on and pay for that pleasure, then you have no choice, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think when especially the fan base in their rage over that trade, over the Fleury trade. I think that's something you didn't hear people talk about a lot, but that's a really important point to keep in mind, Ian, is that the pandemic came in and threw the world on its head, not just sports, but for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, back when they brought Leonard in and they were doing all this, you know, it was the beginnings of the pandemic. We were getting a feeling that maybe it was headed that direction, but you know, nobody knew at that time what was going to happen. And yeah, with the cap and the lost revenue in the NHL, and that threw off everybody's plans. And so, you know, in this case, management found themselves in a hole and they had to get out of it. And, you know, unfortunately, some of the collateral damage was a little bit of, you know, angst among the fan base over that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, honestly, like I love Vegas and I'm actually a fan of management for the most part. I think they could improve on some things, but yeah, like you said, they're aggressive and, you know, it's cup or bust. You know, Bill Foley, the owner, he wants the Stanley Cup. And if they have to upset a few fans to get the cup, you know, they're smart enough to know that when Vegas wins the cup, all those angry fans won't be angry anymore because winning cures all. And, you know, they're putting butts in the seats. Like, you know, there's a huge waiting list for season tickets. They're doing great. And I think a lot of that anger will subside over time, but, you know, and certainly not faulting anybody. I totally understand being upset. Like, I get it. I was super bummed as well, but yeah, you don't hear a lot of practical discussion. It's very emotional still right now. You know? Yeah.
And it probably will. I mean, like, it'll be awful. It'll be really weird to see what happens when he comes back, because I think there'll be a massive amount of respect, but that'll probably reignite some of that anger. The question Definitely. I did have on the Fleury trade, because, you know, we heard a lot of things when it first happened, and one of the things that was constant was around how he was told. And I always say it's a rumor, because obviously, you know, Marc-Andre didn't ring me, and he's not. I've not seen him actually go, other than what people have said, is that he found out about the trade through Twitter, and we mean, you know how good Twitter can be, but it's some that sort of stuff. You feel like, and I've seen this happen at Chicago a few times. The management always has to make tough decisions, and they will always get shot for the ones that don't pay off, and they'll be classed as being lucky for the ones that do. But that feels like a bit of an own goal when you've got somebody that they know is a fan favorite, if they didn't kind of tell him before it broke. Yeah. I mean, listen, if that's the real story, and you mentioned that as well, if that's really the way it went down, then yeah, it's a bad look, right? Like, and I totally get why everybody's cranky about that. Like, it's not cool if it's that cut and dry. You know, my feeling on the flip side of that coin, I can go back on my Twitter feed and see a post that I put up 3 weeks before Fleury was traded. I posted about the rumors that Fleury might be traded to Chicago. So I can't, I don't think it's that Fleury had absolutely no idea. Like, you have to know that him and his agent were discussing it. And, Kelly McCrimmon also said that Fleury was kept in the loop. But your point is totally valid, right? Like, if he got the final news that, yes, you're actually getting traded, if Twitter's the way he found out, that's pretty crappy. Unfortunately, I feel like information moves so quickly these days. It does. Think about it. It's like there's several moving parts to a trade. I'm just putting myself in the shoes of management, and people get mad at me for this sometimes, but it's just how I tend to look at things. I try to kind of look at both sides of a coin, and I put myself in Kelly McCrimmon's shoes or George McPhee. And when it comes time to make the trade, I'm not as educated as some people are on this, but I'm sure there's an official sort of, best practice. There's an official method for doing it. You place a call to the NHL's offices, and you sort of officially, you move this paperwork, you sign this stuff, you put in, the news that is, and I imagine there's these T's that have to get crossed and I's that have to get dotted before it's official. And when you have an office full of people at the NHL and an office full of people at the Golden Knights offices and their spouses and their friends, loose lips sink ships. And the unfortunate reality is all that has to happen is for McCrimmon to make a call, and the assistant or the secretary or other people on that team, somebody texts their friend, don't tell anybody I told you, but they're trading Fleury. I mean, you know how it works, right? Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, the press insiders have it. And so
I sympathize because I think it's really hard to keep anything secret these days. So, I guess maybe they should have called Fleury first, but I get the feeling that maybe there was some concern about the trade. I mean, who knows? Like agents can kill trades. Like they might have been concerned, like, well, if Alan Walsh, Fleury's agent, finds out too early, like they don't, Vegas, he doesn't want to leave Vegas. Maybe he'll kill the trade. Who knows? This is all speculation, but I have a feeling management obviously had some reason why they felt they needed to complete the trade before officially telling Fleury. And that's a big if, right? We don't know exactly how it went down, but that seems to be the official story. And it's certainly not ideal, is it? It's not a great way for things to go down. No,
and I think it's a valid point you made there, and there are lots of moving parts. I do think that I believe that he found out via Twitter. And the only reason I say that is because I said I haven't got any inside information, so I'd be lying if I said that there was some link to the NHL.
Myself as well. Yeah, I don't know any more than anybody else.
The way, I think it was the way that Fleury reacted, because like his initial reaction, and it was very emotional, and that was the thing that I saw that kind of made me think, well, it kind of feels like there's a bit of weight to this story, which is his initial reaction was, well, I think I'm going to retire. Before he then thought about it and then realized that it, kind of makes sense to give Chicago a go. And this is a team that, without me getting too biased, but it's a team that nearly made the playoffs last season. They've added some good pieces. Stan Bowman undoubtedly sat down and said to Marc-Andre, look, this, we're the same as Vegas. We're in win now mode as well. This isn't a rebuild, although he said last year it was. But then, trading for Seth Jones was some pretty bold moves by them. So it's not like he's being shipped off to Buffalo, where you could understand him maybe looking at thinking, But and before people go mental, I don't hate Buffalo either, but there's a slight difference between being traded to a team that's got a chance. And obviously on day one, all 32 teams have a chance of getting to the Stanley Cup final, but some more than others. So I totally get that. Now, if we move away from Fleury, because there is a risk that we could probably spend an hour talking about him.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode just on that, exactly.
And as you can tell from behind me, like there's a reason why his jersey is one of the two that I chose, because I'm an absolutely huge fan. But it wasn't the only move that they made. They did make some other ones. Now we can pick up Ryan Reeves obviously last, because it was probably the more minor in terms of moves from if you look at numbers perspective, but we can argue this in a minute. But the other massive trade, which I suppose, unless you're going to think of one I haven't thought of, was the one that involved Nolan Patrick. That was another trade where I kind of sat there going, okay, I don't get that.
Yeah, like a little bit puzzling, right? In fact, for a lot of Knights fans, Nolan Patrick was just like completely off the radar. Like, especially he's playing for the Flyers, right? Since he's not in our division, a lot of people just didn't even know who he is. But
he's had injury issues as well. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to kind of be horrible about a guy who's only had a couple of professional seasons in the league, because Nolan Patrick could still end up being an elite center. But when you're taking someone on who's had concussion issues, it just seemed like a really odd trade, unless there was something with Glass that I did from an outsider's perspective I didn't see.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thing, what I see with the Nolan Patrick trade, I think, and Kelly McCrimmon has historically been very good at this. The team in general has been very good at this. I think Nolan Patrick, for them, is this guy has got tons of untapped potential. And according to our analysis, he just was not plugged into a system that allowed him to take advantage of that potential. I think that's what they're thinking on Patrick. I think he was a second overall, I think, draft pick.
He was, yeah.
And he played for the Brandon Wheat Kings, which was the team Kelly McCrimmon, owned and managed and coached. So he knows the player really well. And so I'm thinking that move was based on that. He's a player that's been on their radar. And I think they probably feel that he wasn't in a situation where he was allowed to shine. You know how it is. Like, player can be great, but if they're not plugged into the right roster, if they're not plugged in with the right line mates, there's no chemistry. I think they're thinking he's got a ton of potential and he hasn't had a chance to realize it. But yeah, right, the concussion stuff, the injury stuff, that's obviously concerning. I think for them though, I don't know not sure if they've actually even, I don't think they've signed he doesn't have a contract yet, right? Like the trade, but I don't know if they've locked down a deal with him yet, but I don't think he's going to be real expensive right now.
No,
so I also think for them, it's kind of lower risk. And I expect Nolan Patrick to be a depth forward starting out. I think he's going to be like a third line guy, a fourth line guy. You plug him in with Tuck and Dadonov maybe, or we got a bunch of good depth forwards there, but he could be a lethal player. But yeah, I'm with you. It was the day that it happened, I was like, okay, yeah, not a big splash, but that's where they're lacking. I think the team needs more depth scoring, and he could be a good move in that regard. Could be, right, with an asterisk on the end.
No, yeah, it makes sense actually. I didn't know the McCrimmon kind of backstory in terms of him knowing Patrick when he was at the Wheat Kings. So, Patrick was in terms of when he was taken second overall. I think that was the Nico Hischier draft. Somebody can feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, or I'll have to try and Google it quietly while you're talking.
Right, exactly. You might have to get out the keyboard here.
I think it was that draft because there was a massive discussion of whether Patrick was going to go first overall or not, and I'm pretty certain it was New Jersey that were the team that was selecting first. So he was in that conversation. Yeah. And look, being first overall draft, as we know from, we can go back through many drafts and find that the top three didn't amount to much. But he did have a high ceiling. It's just injuries. So maybe it is going to be a reset. If you're looking at teams that have managed to get the best out of people that haven't worked at other organizations, that's kind of was Vegas's MO year 1 and 2. I mean, when people were comparing the Vegas squad that was chosen in the expansion draft to the Seattle squad, there were quite a lot of comments that I saw where people were saying, Seattle have got a weaker team. And I thought, GMs have learned, so there wasn't the obvious, they've been clever over the last couple of years, signing deals. I mean, leaving people as UFAs because they knew that they didn't have to protect them is something that they wouldn't have done back in the expansion draft with Vegas because they didn't know. So they got smarter, but Vegas' team on day one didn't look that great. It's just that these players gelled within that system, within that kind of culture, like William Karlsson, people like that, who Columbus were quite happy to see go. And then he became an absolute stud, in a Vegas jersey. So maybe that'll happen to Patrick. It'll be good to see.
That's a very Vegas thing. It's definitely the team culture. I feel like the culture and management and the team, that's a very Vegas way to be, like to bring in some guy that has been sort of a middle of the road or bottom six player or a bottom pairing defenseman. And then they come to Vegas and they totally shine. Obviously there's always a risk, but that's my vibe on the Nolan Patrick trade. I think kind of like you're saying, I think that's another one of those hidden gem kind of acquisitions. They don't always work out, right? I mean, we even brought in players that you thought were going to be a lock for being amazing, and it didn't work out, right? That happens. Like that happens to every team. Certainly, Tomas Tatar didn't work out in Vegas the way everybody hoped he would, and now he's killing it in Montreal. And of course, Shipachyov, was supposed to be the big star center, and that lasted all of, I think he played 2 or 3 games in a Knights uniform. So there's always a gamble, but yeah, I think with Patrick, that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping they're going to unlock, the guy's potential. So
I'd forgotten about Shipachyov. That is a blast from the past. I know Vegas haven't got that much past, but they have enough that I forgot that a player played. Like you said, he might have played maybe 7 face-offs or something like that, but he didn't get a lot of time.
Scored 1 goal and got 2 or 3 games. And that was big drama right out of the gate. I mean, that was like early in the team's history. Yeah. That was huge news around here. And, Shipachyov was not happy. And yeah, that was the first bit of big time drama for the team. And that was early in the season. So
I'm conscious of time, and obviously me and you love to talk, so it was no surprise that we're probably a little bit behind on the agenda, but it's fine. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, and rather than kind of analysing all of the trades that have happened in the off-season, I guess the best question to ask that summarises all the moves that have happened is, and it's twofold, so I'll let you answer both, is one, did they get better? So did they get better as a team in this offseason? And secondly, so the second part of that question is, are Vegas still going into next season in win now mode? Is it still cup or bust?
Yeah. So to your first question, did they get better? I think they got better on paper. I think there's a big if attached to that. If the players they brought onto the roster play to their full potential, it is absolutely a better team. Particularly with adding Dadonov, like he's a 20 goal per year guy if he's playing well. He had a rough season last year, but Dadonov playing on the third line, when Tuck comes back from injury, they needed depth scoring. I think the bottom six is stronger than it was before on paper, but there's an asterisk there. All those players need to play to their potential, which is always the case, of course. So if those players have good seasons, then yes, I think the team improved. If those players have weaker seasons or kind of continue, maybe not realizing their potential, then I think it's the team's roughly the same, which is still quite good, right? I mean, conference final 3 out of the 4 seasons. So I still think they'll be a contender, but whether they improved or not, it obviously remains to be seen. But yes, I think on paper you can say it's a deeper roster. They didn't do the big splash signing yet. They might, but I think the roster has more depth. That third line is more like a second line on a lot of teams, and we have not been able to say that about Vegas in the past. So, and then the second part of the question, remind me what was the second? It was a 2-pronged question. What was the second part again?
So the second bit was, are they still in win now mode?
Win
I think you called it
mode.
Cup or bust. I think was what you called it at the beginning of the show.
Yeah. There is no doubt in my mind that Vegas is still in win now mode. Bill Foley has established a winning culture. He wants a Stanley Cup in Vegas. And I think, it is very much cup or bust. And they are pushing the cap and all of their resources within an inch of its life to get that Stanley Cup. There's some risk involved there, right? But most of the teams that win cups do have to push that cap really hard, and they have to make aggressive moves. And I absolutely think they're definitely still in win now mode at the moment. That can't go on forever, right? Eventually it's going to peter out, and teams have to go through these cycles, right? You eventually got that window, and then you have to tear down and rebuild. But at the moment, I would say definitely win now.
Yeah.